BT Sport Pods.
Everything changed in the fact that they wanted to know what you did outside of football.
Robbie Fowler was the one person that I used to look up to.
They never really managed to make it a team that could go all the way.
Welcome to the Premier League Storybook with me, Jake Humphrey. This is Chapter 3, The Spice Boys. So far in our storybook, we've looked at teams that rewrote the rules on the pitch, claiming Premier League titles and etching themselves in folklore forever. However, the Premier League also brought a load of excitement off the pitch. The new league soon saw a throwback to the George Best types of the 60s and 70s, where footballers were as well known as pop stars. This happened throughout the league, but possibly nowhere as much as Liverpool. The side that dominated football globally in the 70s and 80s were finding the new decade more difficult to deal with, particularly with Manchester United sweeping up domestic honours. The 90s at Anfield were a strange time. You had some of the most talented players in the club's history with a failure to win big honours, and they became more famous for their antics off the pitch. David James was an Armani model, Jamie Redknapp appeared on the cover of Smash Hits, and Steve McManaman, well, we'll get to him. It would be unfair, though, to stick all of this at Liverpool's door. Martin Keown, whose Arsenal teammates were in the press for the wrong reasons in the 90s as well, sheds a light on the drinking culture in English football at the time.
People would play the game, they'd get dragged along, they end up in the West End, and they get people patting them on the back, buying them drinks. Obviously people have gone too far, but that became a habit, that became a part of the fix, I suppose, of the adulation that followed when you played in those really big games. You're living the dream, you're playing in the first team suddenly, and you're on that roller coaster journey around town. Well, I didn't take that. I'd got in the car and drove home to my family. A bit boring, but I was pretty focused.
Up at Liverpool then, a young Michael Owen was in the youth team, idolising the senior stars and not too worried about what they got up to off the pitch.
I looked up to all the players. I went away actually for 2 years to go to Liverpool, which was the select 16 players in the country would get selected to go to Liverpool and represent England. So on my wall at that age, I was 14, 15, something like that, I had everybody. Robbie Fowler, Steve McManaman, John Barnes, Jamie Redknapp, the whole lot, the whole team. And I suppose Robbie Fowler was the one person that I used to look up to and think, wow, he's come through the ranks and that's someone I want to emulate. I don't think there was people that were going out getting drunk on a Friday before a Saturday game, but I was aware of an image that maybe the press had portrayed, that Manchester United were this serious team that were winning the league all the time, and Liverpool were this boys' club that were, having a lot of fun. But I don't think it was 100% accurate. Of course there were, lads that like to go out and whatever at the right time, and it was certainly a laugh in the dressing room. It was a great team spirit, but I don't think it was unruly. I don't think it was, well, in fact I know it wasn't. There was some great lads. I couldn't point a finger and said there was one bad apple there. I thought everyone was brilliant, were brilliant to me as well coming into the team. But yeah, listen, the media ruled back then. The image that they want to create was just, that was it, that was gospel.
So it's time now to do some myth busting. Was this team of McManaman, Fowler and co a reckless team of Jack the Lads, or were they, in fact, a hugely talented side who just came up against the wrong Man United teams of the day? We'll hear about the Spice Boys nickname, the day Robbie Williams joined the team coach, and those white suits. Who better to tell us than the local lad himself, Steve McManaman? So first of all, let's talk about this tagline, the Spice Boys. Does it sit comfortable with you or does it annoy you?
I honestly don't care about it, Jake, to be very honest. It doesn't interest me whatsoever. But the fact that we still talk about it 30 years later showed that it had some relevance, I think, at the time, or it certainly shows that it's still in the public persona, because people keep asking you about it, or people ask you about the silly white suits and stuff like that. But at the time, it never ever bothered me, to be honest.
Even back then, did you and the rest of the players see it as a compliment or a bit of a dig?
Oh, it was always a bit of a dig. It was always a criticism, because it was never said in it was never said in a context where it was always going to be, where it could ever be a compliment. It was always some sort of criticism. And because there was maybe 8 or 9 people in the team who were maybe young enough, the group gravitated towards who the players were out. So if 3 or 4 lads were out in London, they were in the group. And then if 3 or 4 different lads were out in London the following week, they were still in the group. So that's why I just wasn't that interested in it, really. The only thing that you wanted to do was win games and win trophies. And if you won trophies, probably people would talk about it less. The fact that we weren't as successful as maybe we should have been or wanted to be, the moniker may have stuck a little bit more.
This is interesting though, isn't it? Because this is the period where it went from the press and the fans as well, actually, being interested only in what happens at 3:00 on a Saturday to being interested in the life of a footballer. Like, I remember as a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, just before this era, like Ian Butterworth lived near me, but you didn't care about his private life because it was like he was a footballer, so you just went and watched him play football. Do you remember, like you personally, when suddenly it was like football became more than just what you do on the football field, when it became a real sort of like press interest in everything else?
Yeah, and it was probably around about then, 94, 95, 96, when everything changed in the fact that they wanted to know what you did outside of football. Every time you said a line, you were conscious about what you said because it would get turned around and it would be something else. And, you know, a headline strap would get written by somebody else rather than the reporter, which would indicate something in your story was sensationalist, and it wasn't. That's when it became this, don't speak to him, don't speak to them, you can't talk to them. And that's when it became a real divide between the players and the press. Because I remember going out, I made my debut for Liverpool in 1990. So in those early years when, you know, Liverpool had just won the league in 1990 and were very successful in the late 80s, you know, the relationship between the players and the press was fine. You went on pre-season tour, they came with you, you had a beer with them, you told them stories, they told you stories. And then something happened when it became, you know, it's them against us then. And, you know, it hasn't recovered, has it? You know, you never see anybody now doing any interviews with newspapers. You never really see anybody doing interviews with the TV without people holding their hands. So the gap between the players and like the people who watch football nowadays has widened ever since.
The big difference now, of course, though, is that the players have social media. So if they feel wronged, they can go on there, they can share their side of the story. We've seen really amazing, high-profile examples of players using their social media to sort of call out negative coverage. I guess you had none of that, so you were kind of powerless in that respect.
Yeah, to a certain extent. The only power we had is that you went to the journalist in the training ground, said, I never said that. He said, sorry, I didn't write it. Everybody blames everybody else. And then you didn't speak to him again. But then they just make up stories anyway then when they couldn't get hold of you. So it just become that power battle all the time where you just didn't speak to anybody. That was the problem. And then you'd meet up with England. Then you meet the biggest journalists in the land and you don't want to speak to them either. So it became this, you know, this battle all the time. And that's what happened in 96 when they wrote a load of stories about England being away in China and Hong Kong and me wrecking an aeroplane, which was completely untrue. And in the end, we never spoke to any of them. So you get to a point like that where the break is just complete then. When you just say, right, we're not speaking to any written journalists. We don't mind speaking to the television because the television reports what you say. But we're not speaking to any written journalist in fear of everything getting turned over.
So when we talk about this Spice Boys thing, like, was it an actual thing? Was it a group of guys constantly going to London, constantly going out, being surrounded by Robbie Williams, loads of drinking, loads of fun? Or was that a narrative created by the press that you actually all felt was probably unfair?
Well, I think certain people went out and certain people were friends with Robbie Williams. So those specific examples you've just chosen, I'd say, yes, that did happen. But I can guarantee and quite hands on heart say, I never finished a game on a Saturday and went down to London for a night out. I might go out in Liverpool, but I certainly didn't go out down to London and hobnob it with the rich and famous. But yes, Robbie Williams did come to our game and I did meet him. But, you know, that wouldn't be any different than any pop star going to watch Manchester United or any pop star going to watch Arsenal or Chelsea back in the day. But there were people in our team that did go, you know, did finish a game on a Saturday and go to Manchester Airport and have a night out in London. But I certainly didn't do that.
Wasn't there a story that Robbie Williams ended up on the team coach to an Aston Villa game? Is that true?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, I think he did one day.
See, because that is pretty wild. Like, that wouldn't happen today.
No, probably not. But I bet you it happened back then. I mean, I don't know the circumstances around it. And there was other stories about that Aston Villa game where people were passing pound coins around and all that. And I just thought it was absolute. I don't know whether it did happen. What happens now is that, you know, a lot of players do after dinner talks and tell these stories. And of course, these stories get embellished to be even funnier and more crazy than what they once were. But again, I wouldn't, you know, for me to take part in a football match where you're passing a pound coin around during a game, I think it's absolutely astonishing and disgusting, to be honest. I was certainly never privy or part of these actions when I was in a Liverpool shirt.
It does feel like there's quite a few urban myths, or maybe quite normal things that have become embellished, whether it's this pound coin being passed around, whether it's who can date a member of the Spice Girls, whether it's going into bars and burning money. Who knows whether this stuff went on? But I think that period was such a fascinating period for football fans, because you were the first kind of like tabloid football team, right? So therefore, these stories have maybe over time just become urban legend or urban myth or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's probably a little bit of truth in a lot of the stories, but definitely as time's gone on and people have told these stories, like Chinese whispers, a little bit gets added on to make the story funnier, and a little bit more gets added on to make the story funnier. I mean, I've listened to ex-Liverpool footballers tell stories and after dinner talks and things like that, and a lot of them are absolute nonsense, and a lot of the stories are embellished. And I say to people, that didn't happen. That never happened. But of course, it's less funny when you tell the true story. So I understand why they're saying it now. And I understand why these stories grow a little bit more and a little bit more. And again, that's why it doesn't really bother me that much. I know the truth. I know what the players were like who I played with. I know the ones who were professional. I know the ones who weren't professional. I know that players wouldn't go out night before games, 2 nights before games, drinking and things like that. But again, the story's better if, he was out the night before a game and he was drunk the night before a game. The story's far more cooler then. But it's complete nonsense.
It also overshadows what was a stunningly talented football team. I mean, it was almost like watching a sort of a Spanish team knocking the ball around, playing continental football, wasn't it? What was it like to be involved in it?
I think that's where you lose a bit of it, you see, because we think, when we finish second or third or fourth, nowadays that's applauded. Nowadays that's congratulated. Back then, if you didn't win, you lost. Whereas nowadays, if Manchester City win, you don't say everybody else has lost. You say, they've had a great season, or they played some great football, or weren't they unlucky? But, 20 years ago, it was like they were the best and the rest were just hopeless. And we played some great football. We played some great entertaining football. We were a fantastic team. We were probably just 1 or 2 players short of actually getting to the top, which there's 19 teams who were like that at this moment in time. But as you said, maybe because it was the first time it was starting to happen, the fact that people focused on it more and become a little bit more, a little bit more disrespectful of it or criticised it a little bit more.
It's an interesting point in that, because you finished 4th, then 3rd, then 4th, then 3rd. At that time, you're totally right. It was just Manchester United up here winning trophies and Liverpool kind of almost failing because they were always in their wake, or they were sort of stumbling and not quite. And what about your own memories, your personal memories of that comparison of Liverpool and Manchester United? Because the sort of the young talent coming through was happening at a similar time, wasn't it? And if anything, you and your Liverpool players were probably more lauded for a period of time than the youngsters at United.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know why that is. Maybe they were a little bit more low-key than us, or at the time may have been low-key, or Sir Alex kept a grip on them maybe a little bit more. I don't know why that would be. But every time we played them, their games were always very close. Of course, we met them in the, we won the League Cup in 95. So you win a trophy back then, which is, again, something to be lauded at, certainly in this day and age. We got to the final in 96, which was a bit of a damp squib, really. It wasn't a great game, but we lost it. So we were always there or thereabouts in these cup competitions. So it wasn't as if the players were just abject failures all the time. We got to finals and things like that. It's just that you've sort of criticised for not winning more than you did. Whereas nowadays, it's hard to win bloody anything nowadays. So it's just, you take it all with a pinch of salt. But I don't know why. I don't know why we may have been lauded, but there was always a comparison with, I don't know, Jamie Redknapp and Nicky Butt, for instance, or Scholesy, or Robbie Fowler, and I don't know what, somebody else. Certainly the local homegrown lads. There was always bits of comparisons with. But when we played each other at the times, it was always very close between us. Always very close. It's just that they probably had something. Whether it was a bigger squad, whether it was just a little bit more quality, but they had something that just got them to the finish line where we didn't. And maybe again, talking about now. Manchester City just have that something special that helps them get to the finish line. And then everybody else comes, nowhere.
And what was your relationship like with those young United players? Did you get to know them well? I mean, I guess England duty was the only time you spent time around them. But
no, they were very distant. When they came on England duty, I got to know some of the younger ones, to be honest, the ones who got into the squad in the 94s and the 95s. But I think when they came in en masse, when there was 5 or 6 of them there, it became less friendly and more, I don't know whether it was a Fergie thing, I don't know whether it was a Manchester United players thing, but when I joined England, if there was a spare seat on the table, you went and sat on it. And if it was next to Dennis Wise or next to Teddy Sheringham or next to Martin Keown, you sat down no matter what team. But when the Manchester United boys came in their numbers, if there was one spare seat, they'd just go and sit on a separate table. And then their teammates would then eventually come in and join them. So there'd be 5 or 6 on the table. That was my recollection. Not in the early days, as I said, not in the 94, 95, but certainly 96, 97, 98, when more of them started to break into the team en masse. They would rather sit together than sit with anybody else. And then that's when I think the fractions started to show in an England team.
And did Terry Venables, who would have been in charge at the time, did he not notice that and do something about it? Or
well, Terry was okay. When I think back to the tournament in 96, and we all got on very, very well. Very well, whether it was in England or whether we stayed in Burnham Beaches. And I'm not sure how many Manchester United players were in the squad back then. I seem to think that the group dynamic was excellent. Less so in 98, less so in 2000. But I'm thinking 94, 95, 96, you have to excuse my memory. Certainly 96, the camp was great. The camp was great. And I think 98 wasn't so great, and 2000 became a little bit more fractious. And then for 2002 and 2004, I don't know, but 96 was Terry Venables, 98 was Glenn Hoddle, 2000 was Keegan, 2002 was Sven. So you're talking about a different manager taking over a different layout, every couple of years for the different tournaments.
So when you look back on 1996, there's only 2 Man United players in that squad.
Oh, was the okay?
That was it, Gary and Phil Neville, yeah. But then when you roll forwards to 98, you would have had David Beckham, Teddy Sheringham, Gary Neville, Paul Scholes. So suddenly there was a much bigger contingent of United players. I wonder whether, and you can probably reflect on this much better now than at the time, I wonder whether an element of this came from Manchester United and came from that will to win that Sir Alex had, which was just like, look, remember, you might be playing together for England, but there's a rivalry here.
Yeah, I think so. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it wasn't necessarily in the tournaments because, of course, between the 2 tournaments, you'd play 10 or 15 games, throughout the 2 years. So people would come in, Andy Cole would come in, Nicky Butt would come in. Teddy was less so because Teddy, of course, was a lot older. So he probably wouldn't get involved that much with that. But I certainly think the younger, more impressionable Manchester United players, I think once they got to, certainly the late 90s when everything was competitive, I imagine Sir Alex having don't tell them anything. Don't you show them anything. Don't you show them anything that will, hinder us come Saturday when Manchester United are playing. I certainly believe that was very, very prominent within the group.
And could England have done better if that hadn't happened? Or do you not think it impacted them?
I wouldn't, mate, I wouldn't necessarily say that because I think when you get into tournament football, it shouldn't matter anyway. I don't necessarily need to be friends with everybody because once you get on the pitch, you do your own thing. So I wouldn't blame it. I wouldn't blame it on the performances in the tournaments. Certainly not in that respect, because I think everybody wants to win. And I'm not bothered about being friends with a lot of people because you don't need to be. But I certainly think for probably in the other games, the lesser games, where you'd meet up on a Sunday and then you're back with your club on the following Saturday, I think it probably maybe affected them a little bit more because you're there for such a short space of time and then you're into a Premier League game, a week later, whereas the tournament football was the end of the season stuff. It didn't matter what went on before. You were together for 4 or 5 weeks. You did your best to befriend everybody because, you were living with each other for 4 or 5 weeks.
Let's talk then about Liverpool and about this period. The 95-96 season was a real highlight on the pitch for the team you were involved in. And you remember you beat Newcastle in that famous 4-3 game. And you were at that point genuine title contenders. Did you think at any point that you were going to do it for Liverpool?
Probably that game against, I think the game against Newcastle brought Newcastle closer to us, didn't it? And then brought us back into sort of the title run. And then we played a game after that. Again, you might know more than me. We played a game after that, and I think we lost to something like Coventry or something, who were near the bottom of the league. And it was just typical of our performances at that time, where we played the best teams and beat them comfortably and play really well. And then we play a really weakened team who were near the bottom of the league, who might have a bit of fight about them, and then they would beat us. And when that happens, you just feel it's not going to be there. But I always felt as if we had the talent to do it. Definitely.
Your memory is obviously good because, you beat Newcastle 4-3, but actually the game before that, if you remember, you were beaten by Forest. And the game after that, you were beaten by Coventry.
There you go, yeah.
So you sandwiched that great win over Newcastle with 2 defeats to teams that you would have expected to have beaten.
That nowadays, you just go and beat them and that's the end of it. You go and win ugly and you go and beat strong and you go and win. But I think that era, we brought in Stan Collymore for a lot of money, who was, I think, may have been a record signing. In 92, we brought Dean Saunders in, who was a lot of money. Mark Wright. We brought in John Scales and Phil Babb. So we always, Liverpool were always investing in new people to try and make the team better. We just couldn't, put the finishing little bit on it, really.
And talk us through your thoughts at that time on Roy Evans. I mean, I see people sort of describe him as a bit of a soft touch, or not quite cut out for management right at that very top level. What do you think?
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's your own professionalism, Jake. That's what matters. I couldn't care whether you were my manager or my dad was my manager. It's all about you. You can't say he's a soft touch. He let players get away with this, or players didn't do that. Players should get up, work hard, play football, win every game, and behave professionally. This thing about, I thought Roy Evans was a great manager. He was a great guy. He'd been at Liverpool for 30 years before he became manager. They won everything. So you can't cast aspersions on people like that about their character when they've won everything like that. I mean, I know he wasn't the boss, but he certainly was a pivotal member when Bob Paisley was there, when Joe Fagan was there, when Kenny Dalglish was manager. They played really important roles. I was at the club when Kenny was manager. He gave him a debut. He lent on Roy Evans and Ronnie Moran all the time. It was because he was player manager. So you can't just say that to him. He was probably unlucky at times, I think, Roy Evans, at games we should have won. But once he sends players out onto the pitch and they perform brilliantly against Newcastle, he sends the same players out on the pitch the following game and they don't perform. It's not Roy Evans' fault.
Yeah.
It's the players' fault.
What about the man before? Did you enjoy life under Graham Souness?
Well, I personally did. And Suey was completely different than Roy Evans. Suey came in like a battering ram and wanted to change this and wanted to change that. And a lot of it was for the good. But he got criticised because he changed things in an era where probably didn't need changing. But he was getting the latter part of that great team of the late 80s, early 90s. He took over then and was trying to tell a lot of these players who'd been playing for Liverpool for 12 years that this was the right way to go and this was the right way, to diet-wise, and you should be actually doing this and less drinking and more eating these foods. And he came up against a lot of the older players who was 31, 32 going, well, I've done this for 20 years and it's never done me any harm. So I'm not doing that. And I think that's what happened. And in the end, some of the players wouldn't conform and he had to get rid of them. And I think if you speak to Graham now, he says he probably got rid of some of the too many experienced players in one go. And he probably did. I think 4 or 5 left where he probably should have kept one. He should have let 1 or 2 go and keep 2. Because in the end, he had to rely on a lot of the younger players who just weren't ready at the time, who weren't experienced enough. But again, if you win, you're a genius. If you win, you're Arsene Wenger, came over, changed the diet, changed this, changed that. If you lose, it's because he tried to change things. And when I was at Liverpool, we used to turn up at Anfield, get changed at Anfield, get on a coach, drive 20 minutes to the training ground, train, get back on the coach, dripping wet, or if it's poured down or sweaty or whatever, drive 20 minutes back to Anfield and get changed. Graham Souness came in when this is ridiculous. All just drive to the training ground, get changed there, get showered there, let's modernise the training ground and leave from there, which makes absolute perfect sense. But when you don't win, it's wrong. And that's the thing. And because they'd won all the time, for the last 30 years prior, doing that, you always feel as if, you shouldn't change it. You shouldn't change it when you're winning, which of course you have to change. It's just part of life.
So why do you think then that you got close but didn't quite do it? Because you look at the amazing young talent you came through with. I mean, the talent in that squad was unbelievable. Then you had the older players, didn't you?
Just weren't good enough.
Really?
It's like looking at Chelsea now. Why didn't they just, haven't they won the league yet? Yet they've won the Champions League, which is great, of course. But there's always questions. Why haven't Man City won the European Cup, the Champions League? It's because it's a little bit of luck at times. It's switching off in games at times. Just not having the capacity to win 4 competitions, to fall off in a few. There's a number of factors, really. But, you can't just pinpoint one game. At one game, we probably would have been unlucky. We've battered the team and couldn't get the victory, so you lose a couple of points. There's other teams where we've made mistakes, individual mistakes, where someone's missed the sitter or the goalkeeper's thrown one in and you've lost the game. And you can pinpoint it at times why you've lost 4 or 5 points, 6 points in it. Or you can pinpoint times why you got knocked out in a semi-final or why we didn't win the final. Things like that happen when you analyse it. But I just think overall we were probably 1 or 2 players short, or a little bit mentality short of getting over the line.
And what about for you personally? I've read reports that Sir Alex Ferguson would have a special plan for you, which he had for very few players and very few teams. That's pretty flattering, Macca.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I left was because I was playing really, really good football, but probably wasn't getting the credit that you deserved, really. I hadn't played in the Champions League, which was killing me, but back then it was only the champions who were playing in the Champions League. I felt I was good enough to play at that level. 96, 97, 98, I was playing wonderful football for Liverpool, but not winning anything. And that was one of the things in the back of my mind saying, look, you might have to leave. You might have to test yourself. If you want to go elsewhere and test yourself against the best players in Europe, stroke the world, you might have to leave. And that was one of the reasons why I had to go. And all these questions that you get asked like this, I can answer these questions because I went to Real Madrid and played for a manager who actually didn't do much. And I saw the mentality of the players there. And there wasn't many differences between the actions of those players who I played with and was hugely successful with than the actions I played with the players in Liverpool and wasn't successful with it. The Real Madrid players love to drink. The Real Madrid players love to go out and enjoy themselves after games. It's just that the press weren't interested. But once it came down to the playing of the football match, they were locked in, tuned in, and they were ready to go. But, our training sessions were, very basic to an extreme. The manager said, the words he had to say, but really, once it came into the dressing room, the captain was the one who was getting everybody ready for the game, and the manager would join the huddle, and the captain would be the one who's shouting and screaming. It wouldn't be Del Bosque. Del Bosque knew, I'm going to leave it to them, and that's why he was amazing. His man management was superb. So all this stuff about, he was too soft, and he was too noisy, and he was too angry, most of it's absolute garbage. In the end, the 11 players go out on the pitch and the 15, the substitutes who help come out. And it's down to them.
But if you'd have won 2 Premier Leagues and 3 or 4 FA Cups in that time and played in the Champions League, these questions wouldn't be asked. Do you know what I mean? These questions are a direct result of people from the outside going, there must be a reason why you didn't win.
Yeah, of course. Maybe in the end, Jake, it just comes down to the quality of the player and the mental strength of some of the players to get it done. When the going gets tough, to really knuckle down and do it and go that extra mile. I don't know.
Do you think you're underrated now as a group? You're not really revered or remembered as actually as good as that group was?
It depends. And the fact that Liverpool have gone on since then and been successful, you would speak less of that era because you'd talk more about the era of now or the era of the 80s when they won the trebles and stuff. And then you would revert back to maybe when Rafa won the Champions League or when Houllier won the sort of that treble when it included the UEFA Cup. There's always eras that perform better than you. So you become less relevant, don't you? If you speak about Norwich, you will speak about the time when they get promoted or whether, they were playing Bayern Munich in the European Cup, Winners' Cup or whatever, and Jeremy Goss scored, that era. You always speak about the era that you remember and you era that they were at the highest level. And, other eras just fade away to a certain extent if you keep on surpassing the eras that have been before you.
And this period that we're kind of focusing on in this conversation about the Spice Boys, Did it kind of end when Gerard Houllier came to the football club? Or had it kind of melted away a bit before then?
I don't know. I left when Gerard arrived. Roy Evans left in the October, November, and I left at the end of that season. But I know there was still a lot of I think Neil Ruddock was still there, Jamie Redknapp was still there. All these players that were associated, Phil Babb. I think I was the first one to have left. So I don't know whether 3 years later there was there was so-called members left of that squad, and whether they still got called it, because I left, of course. So I don't know whether it persisted, that name at the time.
And what was the press reaction like around your departure at Liverpool? I remember it being weirdly a bit negative. Is that right? Yeah, a little bit negative, yeah. Because, of course, Liverpool were going through a transitional period at the time because Roy Evans left and Gerrard arrived. And it was always a case of, well, if Liverpool lost, it was my fault, really, because I was still one of the main players and one of the sort of the leaders in the group. So, of course, if you're going to leave at the end of the season, it's an easy excuse that it can be bandied at you. Oh, he's leaving at the end of the season. He doesn't care. He's leaving at the end of the season. He's not really bothered. Which of course was ridiculous at the time. So it just became an easy strapline, probably for the press. If you lost the game, it was my fault. If we won the game and I was man of the match and I scored, we won't even mention that because you're leaving. So I just think it was an easy excuse to pin on people. But the majority of people around me, because I lived in Liverpool, I didn't feel that negativity at all, to be very honest, at the time. People were very proud of me that I was a Liverpool lad and I was leaving to go to Real Madrid. That's what I felt, or people would say that to me when I met them. So the overall negativity around that, I don't know. But it was quite easy to be negative about it because I arrived at Liverpool and I was leaving on a free contract. So there was a lot of, little barbs to get at if you wanted to. And there was a lot of false stories about how much I was going to earn or how much Liverpool had offered me and how much I was getting paid off Liverpool, my new contract, and a nurse earns this much on the radio, which is, of course, completely ridiculous and nonsensical. And it wasn't even true at the time. But a lot of people made a lot of headlines about it. Yeah. But there's no regrets at all from you, is there, making that move to Spain?
God, no. Never. No. Because I lived in the moment. I knew what was happening. I knew how, I went through contract negotiations with Liverpool. I knew how they went. I knew how long they took to get round to it. It would never happen nowadays. It would never, ever happen that arguably the best player in the team is one of the lowest players and is for a long time. When you were a schoolboy and you start at 14 and you climb these rungs of this ladder, how I perceive it, and you get a little bit more money and they add another year onto your contract, and then you get a little bit more pay rise and they add another year onto your contract. You're just there forever. And then they're signing players and they're on 3-4 times more than you. And you feel as if you're far more important to them. And, and in the end, when you get round to the conversations, it's very half-hearted conversations and, it's just, so you have this inner feeling yourself about what you need to do and how you feel you're, thought of at the time. And that happens with all the younger lads at Liverpool, the Robbie Fowlers, the Jamie Carragher, the Jamie Redknapps, because he signed when he was only 17. They probably weren't appreciated as some of the bigger signings who come in. And as I said, that would never happen now. If you got to two years left on your contract, they're knocking your door down to sign. That never happened when I was there. They thought they could see it right to the end and then give you a pay rise and then you just jump at the chance. So it wasn't. So I lived in that moment and I knew what it was all about.
And was that because of the culture in the game at the time? Or was that because they're Liverpool Football Club and they look at someone like you growing up on the streets of that city and thought, in an almost arrogant way, who's never going to leave, is he? So
it was probably a bit of both. I mean, he flirted with selling me a couple of years prior to Barcelona, but then that never materialised. And then it was a case of, I will sign his contract. But at the time, I didn't have an agent. And I said, look, I'm available every single day. I'm here. But to get the manager and the chief exec and the chairman in one room and me took like 6 months. And I just thought it was ridiculous. We need to offer you a new contract in September. I'm available any day you want. I'm here. I'll sit down with you. Fine. I think we sat down in April. It was like, from September to April. And then my contract was out the following year. So it was just like, fine, it's cool, no worries. And my initial meeting took 3 minutes, if that. Sat down, we're going to offer you this. I said, no, thank you. And that was it.
Because it was a derisory pay rise.
Yeah. And then the following offer was then months later. So it was all a little bit So I knew what was happening. I was savvy enough. I was 25, 26. I knew what was happening within, because I played for England on many occasions. I knew what was happening. And, I was always thinking about that. My mother was very ill at the time. So I had bigger things on my mind. So it wasn't a huge issue. I'd say, well, Liverpool will come to me. I never chased them. It was like, I'm here every day. No worries. Just let me know. And it came, the meetings came too infrequently, really. And it got to that point where, Roy Evans was manager. They were bringing in a new coach, and in the end, they bring in Gerard Houllier as joint manager. And you could see then there was no the leadership above wasn't working properly, because Roy Evans didn't even know Gerard Houllier was coming in as joint manager. So you could see it just wasn't the place it once was, really.
And if late on, before you agreed the contract with Real Madrid, Liverpool had turned around and said, "Listen, come on, we've undervalued you. We'll make you, we'll pay you what you think you're worth and what we think you're worth." And would you stay? Would you have done?
Maybe, but it all came too late. They offered.
So did they ever do that? Did they ever turn around and go, actually?
Yeah, they came round at the end and offered me fortunes. Of course, a lot of money before I was leaving. When I said I'm going to leave, of course, they offered me way, way, way more than they initially offered me. And you just think to yourself, well, if you would have done that a while ago, I'm not saying it's all about money. It's just about, at the time, being valued, being treated professionally. Knowing that you're an important member of the team and we have to look after you, and moving forward like that. It wasn't as if I went in and I said I won £1 million. I absolutely didn't say that at all. I just listened to their offers and just said, no, thank you. I never went back and with a counter offer, because it was Liverpool. I still had a huge amount of respect for them. But in the end, it got to a point where it was like, right, I think it might be better. It wasn't just a money thing, as I said. Roy Evans coming in and being treated the way he was treated that didn't sit well with me.
What the joint manager thing?
Joint manager thing, I thought it showed a lot of disrespect for him, because he didn't know that was happened. And then the first game of the season, if you win, it's Gerard Houlier's team. If you lost, it was Roy Evans' team. And I just thought it was an awful way of going about it. And there was a mismatch within the team of how the team was getting run, because Gerard wanted to do this and Roy might have wanted to do that, and vice versa. And it was just, it just wasn't good. So that was in my mind as well, because I knew it could go like this for a number of years. And I knew there was a lot of, it was a real transitional period for Liverpool. I knew Gerard was going to get rid of a lot of players and wanted to bring his own players in, because he wants to play a certain style of football. And that probably speeding my process in thinking to myself, it might be time to go, and past is new.
And I know, current footballers or even ex-footballers in your case, you're always really careful about saying it isn't all about the money, because there's this perception that footballers are just in it for the money. But in football, there's very few ways of making a player feel valued, right? Almost the only way you can do it is by showing them, financially what they mean to the football club.
I completely understand that. I absolutely understand it. But it was a number of things. As I said, saying you can have a new contract in September and then sit me in a room in April, that got my goat for a start. Then when I go in, the offer that they put in front of me was nowhere near good enough of what I thought I should have been worth. So yeah, I've got a self-worth of, absolutely, I've got a self-worth of what I should have got. But for them to come back, and then what happened with Roy in the summer months, that again put a seed of doubt in my mind. And then for them to come back again later on and offer me way, way more than they offered me then, you just think to yourself, why didn't you do that then? And then you could have, this could have been all over with at the time. But I mean, I think things like this are done for a reason, and they just help you make a decision one way or the other, don't they? So maybe if they had offered me a different type of deal 2.5 years before and I signed, maybe the team mightn't have been successful, and maybe I wouldn't have won the trophies that I've won. So actually, it helps you decide which way you go, really.
Michael Owen gets criticism for joining Man United. What people don't know is how desperately hard he tried to get back to Liverpool, and it just didn't work out. Was there any thought process when you left Real that Liverpool would have been where you wanted to go? Did you ever try and make that happen?
Yeah, I don't think Gerard Houllier was interested, to be honest. I don't think he was that interested, which is fine. It doesn't necessarily bother me. But it probably would have been easier to come back to Liverpool. But again, whether you would have got the same reception, whether you were the same player coming back. Well, that's where my family still lived, in Liverpool, very much so. And as you said, fans were talking about Michael. They don't realise the options you have and the options you choose. And he has to do what's best for himself, what's best for his family, and more importantly, what's best for his career. And signing for Manchester United at the time was absolutely the right thing for him to do at that stage of his career.
In some ways, like when we talk about the Spice Boys and the press coverage and, the lack of playing in Europe and the trophies you could have won and the way you left, like it feels a slightly negative interview for what was actually an amazing part of your career and an incredible beginning to what was a career that gave you such, incredible trophies and amazing memories. Like, how do you now reflect on that period, that start of your career? Yeah,
I loved it, Jake. I loved it. But when you talk about, the first question was about the Spice Boys. If you played for Liverpool at the time, that has got a negative connotation about it. So, as I said, it doesn't bother me. But I know, like some of those players who may have played, it does get their heckles up a little bit. So, when you start the conversation about that, or the strapline is about the Spice Boys era, instantly you think, because people still ask you about those white suits and stuff like that, which at the time we're fine, but looking back look ridiculous. So people view it as a negative part, but I loved it. I thought our team spirit was brilliant. The lads were all great together. We played some brilliant football, some of the best football we played in a long, long time. We just we're not as successful as we wanted to be, really. That's all it would be. But, I won the FA Cup in 92. It was an incredible moment. I was man of the match in 95, and it was an incredible moment when we won the trophy. So, these things I'll never forget. I cherish them like anything. And that, that period, I won trophies, from 96, 97, 98. Unfortunately, I didn't. And that's sort of classed as the same era, but, a little bit later on.
I'd never realised really quite how unfair Liverpool's 1990s reputation was. I think sometimes we fall over ourselves now for teams that finish third and fourth these days. But this team did that, no problem for years. Maybe it's a Liverpool thing. It hadn't been long since they were the team to beat at home and abroad, so second or third in the league just wasn't considered good enough. But that very slight dip, coupled with some of the antics we've talked about with Steve, I think gives them a bad reputation that actually is undeserved. The one thing, though, that lingers in the memory for me is those white cup final suits. Peter Schmeichel was in goal for Manchester United in the 96 final, a game which was a huge disappointment and is remembered for Liverpool's attire just as much as Eric Cantona's winner.
Having worked a lot with someone like Jason McAteer, I always say the white suits, and he says, no, they were not white, they were beige. It was an interesting team. I think individually they had really, really good players. They never really managed to make it a team that could go all the way. And to win the Premier League, you need to be a team. So it's not just 11 players. It's whoever plays, it kind of needs to look the same, and everybody's got to chip in. And it just felt like it was a team that could go on runs and win a lot of games. And then they could blow up and lose two, 3 games very unexpectedly. It didn't have the grit. Liverpool, Man United, it doesn't matter what area you're in, you always kind of really respect them. You never ever disrespect Liverpool from a Man United point of view, because you do that, they can bite you so hard and it's difficult to recover from. So from our perspective, we never downplayed their qualities in any way, but looking at them playing against other teams, sometimes you just felt that they were not good enough. And there was something lacking, and it's difficult to put your finger on what it was. But of course, when we played them head to head, it was as hard as it could get. For us to win those games, we had to bring our A+ game, and everybody had to bring that A+ game. But they were an interesting team, and that cup final, it was so sad. It was built up as the best ever cup final, the most interest, and it was so boring.
Michael Owen was watching on with the rest of the youth team in the stands.
I travelled on the train actually to watch the team. We were all invited as youth players. I think I must have been about 16 at the time. So all the academy players went down as a group and watched the game at Wembley. To be honest, at the time, again, I think a bomb could go off next to me now and I'd be pretty oblivious to it, to be honest. I'm quite laid back and I just watched the game and saw our players, come out the dressing room area and walk out onto the pitch and thought, they're light suits. I mean, lots of people wear cream suits or beige suits or whatever. It's just a different shade to me. I just thought, It was fine. I mean, I thought they looked all right, actually. It was only after the event that it was like such a big thing made of players in white suits. But anyway, it was it certainly caught the imagination of a lot of people, and to this day people still talk about, you know, getting dressed up for FA Cup finals and the after parties at FA Cup finals and things like that, and the white suits always get a mention.
It might come down to personal opinion on this Liverpool team in the end, wasted talent or cruelly underrated. One thing's for sure though, they captured football fans' imagination, teams that just miss out on big honours often do. And we'll hear a lot more about that in our next chapter, and arguably the greatest Newcastle team ever. Chapter 4 is the Nearly Men.
BT Sport Pods.